Hello, my name is Joanne Tartaglino, and I'm the program coordinator here at SheTek. And welcome to SheTek's Ignite the Spark, Inspire Inclusion webinar, where we're going to be discussing the power of communication in a global workforce. It's part of our International Women's Day program, and we're really excited to get this kicked off. Keep putting that information in there and let us know what brought you to us today, what you want to learn today. There'll be guests here from all over the world, which is really exciting, and that talk about global communication. Before we begin, there's just a couple of things I want to go over, the usual housekeeping items, as it were. Everyone's cameras are off and the microphones are muted by default because we want to hear our panelists speak. But you can go into the Q&A to ask questions, if you have questions to ask, and you will be able to put your comments and responses in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can during the presentation, and then afterwards, if we need to, we'll follow it up. If you want to see the bios of all those speakers, and they'll be introducing themselves, so you'll see that. But we also have it listed on our SheTek page, so you can find out all the information there. And our official event hashtag for today is hashtag STIWD 2024. SheTek International Women's Day 2024. So if you see something you like, or if you want to pop something into LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or any of your social medias, just remember to put that hashtag there for us. Now, I'm going to introduce to you the moderator for the day, Chaya Pamela. She is the founder of SheTek, which was established to increase the number of women in technology through support, training, networking, mentoring, and presenting opportunities. Chaya is also the CEO and president and co-founder of PAM10 Inc., which is a IT staffing and services organization. And she's also the founder of Sofkin, support organization for kids in need, which provides wonderful and caring homes for destitute children in India. So Chaya, if you could come on board, we will kick it over to you.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm so excited for today because we have a record of, I think, over 150 registrations, and we are so excited to have, close to 100 listeners. It's wonderful. First of all, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. And as Joanne mentioned, SheTek is actually an inspiration for me to start SheTek. It's primarily because I've seen very few women in the tech industry, and that's what really initiated this program for us. And through SheTek, we are not only just providing training, we are mentoring. We are also created this platform for many women to share their stories, women and men both, to share their stories and perspectives so we can learn from each other. So without much delay, I would like to invite our guests today. So we have Scott Chesney. Can you please maybe raise your hand or wave your hand so they know? Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Cheryl McCanns. Cheryl, thank you for joining us. And Hope Horwitz, thanks for joining us. Zainab, thanks so much for joining us. So we're going to have this very interesting conversation today, and it's so close to my heart, especially me being an immigrant many years ago. And I really struggled to fit in the culture. And also I had faced many communication challenges. But now the workforce is a lot more complicated than what it used to be because of this global environment, right? The global workforce. We have multi-generations, multi-cultures, races, and we also have a tremendous amount of diversity and inclusion. There is so much focus on it. So we have been listening to many topics on inclusion, and this year's International Women's Day theme is Inspire Inclusion. And what we felt from SheTek perspective is, yes, we inspire inclusion, but what's the first thing that comes to our mind is communication. So we wanted to really focus on how we can encourage the power of communications to bring it to this global workforce. And we have all these people with their different perspectives, and we are so happy to have our excellent panelists here who have really gone through this journey, and they'll be able to speak about their experiences. So we very particularly wanted this discussion to be a free flow, primarily based on specific scenarios from the workplace. So that will be very helpful for our audience. As we speak, listeners, if you have any questions or you want us to speak about specific scenario or a challenge you are currently facing on, just type it in and Joanne will bring it up. We don't mind in the middle of the conversation to respond to your question. So let's get started. I would like our panelists to introduce themselves briefly. Scott, would you like to start first?
Well, thank you, Chaya, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's such a privilege and an honor to be part of such a wonderful event today. My mother would tell you that I've been a communicator since I was in the womb, but it's carried over my entire life. I was a communications major at Seton Hall University, and every single one of my jobs for the past, I'm not going to give my, okay, I'm 53 years old, so every single one of my jobs involves communication, whether it's public relations, marketing, fundraising. And as of the last 24 years, I've had my own business, Scott Chesney LLC, where I've been a motivational speaker, a life coach, and also a consultant. I have spoken to over 1.6 million people in 43 countries to date. But to be here today, this is what I'm excited about, to connect with everyone. And I just want to encourage everyone. I know Chaya and Joanne did a great job. You know what, whatever it is that brought you here today, I want to make sure that you get your answers to whatever questions you may have. Again, there's no such thing as a dumb question, only dumb answers. But I've gotten to know this panel a little bit, and we promise not to deliver any dumb answers. So please, please, whatever it is that your intention was for coming on today, make sure that intention's fulfilled. And moving forward, stay connected to us, please.
Thank you, Scott. Cheryl, do you want to go next?
Sure. So hello, everyone. Chaya, thank you so much for the invitation, and to my fellow panelists, right? Let's put our seatbelts on because we're going to take everybody here for a ride. I am the founder and CEO of a 35-year-old award-winning full-service communication agency. So people say to me, well, what do you do? And I say, we tell stories. So whether it's in the form of digital, whether it is print, because yeah, people do still, flip pages and get ink on their fingers, or social, or whatever outdoor medium, when it comes to PR, marketing, communications, advertising, my team of former journalists, of people that are communicators, of storytellers, we're here to help people connect and communicate. So I'm excited to share some perspectives and to learn a few as well. So look forward to the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Hope, would you like to go next?
Sure. First, I want to start with, I'm only a little bit nervous now, Scott, about my answers. But I'll work on it. I'm Hope Horowitz, and I actually joined my mother's PR business. So Felcher is my mother and Horowitz is me. She started it when I was 10, and I joined her when my 10-year-old was born. And it's been a lot of fun my entire life. I was raised in PR. I like to say old school PR, but we're bringing in a little bit of the new school with social media and influencer campaigns and whatnot. I will say I took a 15-year hiatus from PR. It turns out I really liked the events that she did. And so I actually spent 15 years in nonprofit event planning and fundraising, which was great. And then life happened and I'm back in PR and I absolutely love it. It is a lot about how you communicate with each different person you have to communicate with. So there's a lot of paying attention to someone else's style and being able to respect that style. So I'm excited for this conversation. Oh, and one more housekeeping for Joanne. If you have a question, try and put it in the Q&A, which you'll find on the bottom of the screen instead of the chat, because that'll make my three and Joanne's life easier as we navigate this. So I couldn't resist.
Thank you for that, Hope. Thanks a lot. So next, Zainab, would you like to go next, introducing yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chaya. And thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. I am Zainab Shalang. I am a current student ambassador for SheTek, and I am a platform engineer at Campbell Soup Company and also a master's student at Rider University. I was introduced to SheTek about a year ago by Dr. Nygren. And I am passionate about SheTek because I am passionate about supporting women in tech, and making sure that young girls have they have a representation within the tech spaces, and knowing that this is attainable for girls no matter what you look like within this environment. I am particularly excited because I am the youngest on this platform today, I believe. And I'm excited to share my perspective coming in as someone who is new within the workforce and being so diverse, diverse in race, diverse in age, diverse in gender, being so diverse. I'm really excited to hear what each panelist has to say and to also add to that conversation.
Excellent. We are really excited about that, the mix of the panelists here. So thanks, Zainab. Thanks to everyone. So what we're going to do is do a quick poll to really understand our audience here. So Joanne, do you want to bring up the questions?
I feel like we need some polling music, Chaya, right?
I know, Joanne kept it very quiet.
I'm singing the same music in my head. And I was trying not to do it like out loud so I looked funny.
Right, I know. I couldn't help myself. Jeopardy, right?
Yeah.
You can keep talking. That's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this will give us a good perspective. So
great.
When we are ready, let's see the results. We don't have students? Okay.
They're all in class.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a much nicer answer than I had.
It's a beautiful answer.
Well, Chai, if it makes you feel better, I'm a student of life, so you can add my one person to that if it balances.
You know what, Scott? I was just thinking about that. I'm a continuous learner. I would have been the student as well. Well, thank you. Okay, so thank you everyone for responding to those questions. So we'll get started. So, the topic is really about multi-generations, multi-cultures, races, and we really want to bring that real life examples and have the conversation. As I said previously, this is going to be a free flow of conversation. So the first theme I want to introduce is multi-generations in the global workforce, especially this in the last few years and for the next decade. I'm hearing that there's going to be a mix of multi-generations at the workforce, and we have people who are ready to retire, and we have just students who are just starting their career, and then we have this mid-career people in the workforce. So the multi-generational workforce involves real challenges, right, around communication, because the styles are different, and the technology and the tools are different, right, and even the perspective of hierarchy is so differently viewed by different generations. And of course, some of us, we have difficulty in adapting to the change, and we're a bit resistant to the change. So all these things really influence how we collaborate and work together. So I really want to bring that to you and then let you all think about it. And then whoever is ready to bring up their experience and want to share your experience, please go ahead.
So I'll start.
Okay.
When I was a little younger, and I was finishing my nonprofit career, I got a little burnt out. I hired an assistant, and we had very different styles. So she was very confident, which was actually one of the reasons that I hired her, but didn't quite understand. Um, this is going to be a horrible way to say it, but like her place in the hierarchy, in that very, very basic things, right? All I want to do is give opportunity to everyone, but if you can't show up to work on time, I'm not sure if she heard me the multiple times I said, you're consistently 10, 20 minutes late every single day. Just wake up 10, 20 minutes earlier. Because she was like, well, the traffic is a mess. And I'm like, well, this is your first job out of school. Make an attempt to show up on time. Then I don't care if you're 15 minutes late every day, right? Like if I can see you can do it. So it was a bunch of things like that. I think she was in the wrong position and was probably looking for a job, but as sweet as she was, the communication between the two of us didn't really go well. She didn't seem to understand that I was not saying anything other than directly what I was saying.
Yeah, and Hope, I would chime in, right, and say that what I have seen is very similar. And are we speaking in nuanced language, or are we being direct? And I believe that there is sometimes a misunderstanding, and we have to walk this fine line of being direct and not hurting everybody's feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you say it? You say it again. You say it always, you say it often. And I don't know if it's because of the pandemic. I don't know if it's because everybody was home. I think the level of sensitivity is quite different now than it was back in the day. But I would agree with you completely, Hope, that you can't allude to being late. You have to say, I need you to get here 10 minutes ahead of time so that you are ready to start work 5 minutes before we start. Like you have to say it, wherein you used to not have to just, you could say what you were saying. But I do think that there's a need to be more direct. And then we have to be careful about levels of sensitivity.
Yeah. The level of sensitivity is hard. And that's, so I work with my mother, like I said, and we used to hire interns all the time, and they didn't quite always understand the appropriate attire and what you should wear. And it's specific for everyone's office and everyone's personality. So while I'm in a jacket today, so I look good on Zoom, I'm actually in jeans as well because I'm sitting at home at my desk. But we've had interns who took very well when we'd say, this might be a little too short, this outfit. We can see you're trying to be appropriate with the stockings, but this, and she just was like, oh my God, okay, absolutely. And then there was one year we had someone come in. My mother is not a fan of ripped jeans. So she said something nicely, and the woman quit at midnight that night. She went home and sent an email, and she never came back. So you never know. You do have to be very sensitive. It definitely wasn't what we hoped had happened. We just wanted, knees covered if you're in pants.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conversation, especially, when there are things like that. As Cheryl said, you got to be sensitive, but at the same time, each workplace has its own policies.
Yeah.
I mean, people need to respect that, right? You're not at home. You're coming to workplace, and you need to respect the work policies. And each workplace could have different policies. That's okay.
Yeah.
As long as you're not insulting other culture, that's the fine line we're talking about.
Yeah.
Scott,
you have to that point. Yeah, we put it in our book. Like we have an employee manual,
Mm-hmm.
we have a consultant handbook, we have an intern handbook I even created to address, like, you can wear jeans, they can't be ripped, they can't have holes. And now I have to add, which I learned last week, they can't be, I call it shredded, and I know that's not what it's called because my daughter told me she didn't know what the hell I was talking. She didn't know what I was talking about. But they can't be all frayed at the bottom, right?
They have to be, they have to be nice. They have to be dressy jeans.
They have to be sewn at the bottom. So that's distressed. Thank you, Jennifer. Right. So no distressed jeans. And so I was saying, why do you keep wearing that? Why do you keep wearing that? And finally I said, you cannot wear those again. But then the sensitivity comes in because I then had a conversation around, you have to be aware, maybe they don't have other things to wear, right? And you don't know people's circumstances. And so then you have to have that conversation. I'm here to help. I'm willing to, contribute in any way that's necessary. But to your point, Chaya, we have to maintain a certain level of decorum.
Mm-hmm. I think everything comes with an appropriateness.
Yeah. So, and Cheryl, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I had a boss tell me once that I had to wear a dress to work an entire day and evening at a gala. And I said, well, you can't actually tell me I have to wear a dress just because I'm a woman, but I do have to be dressed appropriately. And I actually had suits that I would wear to work galas, but for this one I went out and I bought a woman's tux so that I was still being respectful, but you can't tell me I have to wear a dress. You just can't. Anyway.
Yeah, excellent points. And Shirley mentioned about, you should approach with the point of how can I help? Right.
Right.
That's really something that hits me because that's what brings everyone onto the same plane. Right.
Yep.
So you're not complaining. You're asking, yeah, this is not working, but how can I help you? So I also want to hear from Scott.
I'm loving everything that I'm hearing. I think what's so important here, because everything that's being brought up, we could just really quickly react to. And I think that's the challenge that we have both. And I want to encourage everyone that's on this call to kind of like put your professional hat on as well as your personal hat, because a lot of times there needs to be a congruency there. But I really wish that we could be more proactive and rather than reactive. And I think what happens is, or how that could happen is if we had a pause button. I really believe if we had a pause button installed when we were born, that would make things so much easier. So rather than reacting or getting angry at something, I think it was Cheryl who brought up, like, really take a moment to think where someone's coming from. And I think when you talk multi-generational is that it's difficult. It's difficult for an older generation to understand all this new technology, all this change. I mean, you get overwhelmed by it. And then all of a sudden, when you talk to the young ones, is that talk about all these things that like were wrong with the old school and so forth. So I think it's a matter of finding balance. So if you think of all the different ways of communicating right now, where there are social media, picking up the phone, writing, is that every individual who's listening right now, find like where your strengths lie, because we all have strengths in certain areas. Where do our strengths lie? And then those ones that maybe make you cringe a little bit and everything, just saying, how can I learn more about doing this? Maybe there's someone even on this panel that's very good at doing this. And I know she's not on this phone call, so I could talk about her, is that I have a 21-year-old daughter. And she's phenomenal at texting, phenomenal at social media. Hey, you know what? Why don't you pick up the phone and call that person who you're interviewing? No, I can't talk to that person on the phone. So it's just, I'm like, wait a minute, that's making a connection. So again, we have strengths in all different areas, and we should acknowledge those strengths and utilize those. But it's those opportunities that we have in our weaknesses, or we can say our areas of improvement, if you don't want to say weaknesses, and really work on those so we can be a balanced communicator. And Chai, I know one of the things we're going to be talking about in a little while too is that we're all talking here. We're all talking, all the panelists are talking and everything, and we have everyone who's on this call listening. Listening is so much a part of communication. And yet think about how we are as listeners too. Are you one of those listeners who's really thinking about what the last person said? Or are you there, I can't wait to say what I'm going to say? So it's almost like hitting that pause button as a listener and saying, okay, really let me listen to what this person's saying so I can come back with such a productive answer or response.
Yeah, Scott, you nailed it. Listening is hard, right? Because listening requires you to be still and to be attentive. And that's not always the easiest thing for folks to do. And you brought up another good point. It's not always what form of communication you're best at. One of the keys is to identify what type of communication is best received by the person you're trying to connect with. And my mother, she's over 80. She will tell you she knows all kinds of technology. And she responds to all of them. And I'm like, why are you on Facebook? Why are you texting? Why are you on WhatsApp? She's like, oh, well, I found it on my phone. And so depending upon who you are, it's like, yeah, but it's 3 a.m., mommy. So depending upon who you are and where you are going, I do think that it's really important to keep in mind the type of communication that is best received by the person that you're looking to connect with, right?
Yeah, very right, very true. Very true.
And
I want to
everybody's
hear
mentioning their mothers too. We're not bashing mothers.
No, I love my mom.
No, we all love our mothers. But no, I think we need to be honest here is that like they're our greatest teachers, but also they're our greatest button pushers. Why? Because they installed the buttons. But it's those button pushers who we learn so much from. We get frazzled by them. And I just don't mean mothers. Please, I love my mother dearly too. But just think in the workplace too, those people who push your buttons is that it didn't bother you. If it didn't bother you, it would go through you or you would take it in. It's those that stick and ruffle your feathers rather than reacting right away saying, why do I have such an energy towards this person or towards what they're saying? And it's usually a great area of improvement for us that needs to be
very, very well said, Scott. Very well said. Especially, talking about mothers, I have so much going on in my head, in a workplace, multi-generational workplace, we try to, when you see youngsters, right, you try to start, feeling like they are your kids and you start treating them that way. And sometimes they like it, they may not like it. So actually, I also want to hear from Zainab, her perspective on all this conversation that's going on.
I actually wanted to comment on what Cheryl said about, trying to understand where someone is coming from if they're exhibiting a certain behavior, but you don't know why. If you're communicating, you need to stop wearing this, but you just don't understand why they're not wearing that. I really like that you brought that empathy piece because I believe in the workplace that's an attribute that is very detrimental to have, to be able to understand people. Because you can have someone who knows what they're doing very well. However, maybe they're lacking in their dress code. I would then, say, this is a place where you want to sit down, kind of understand where is this person coming from? Why is it, they're lacking in this particular section of where they are. And so I really like what you said about that. And then coming to communication, I think communicating is very important. I like that you also mentioned understanding how the receiver receives, right? Understanding how the person receives. But I would even take that further and say, what is the context of the message? Because the context really matters as to what medium I want to use, right? If I'm trying to communicate something to someone like, sometimes when I'm talking to my manager, maybe on a certain task I don't understand, and we are on Teams chatting, I would then pause and be like, okay, I need to ask for a minute to get on a call because this would go faster and I would understand him better and understand the requirements of this project better if we just get on a quick call as to, chatting. Or if I want to speak to my director, I might email them and probably not get an email because they're busy. But if I ping them, they respond to that ping faster than they would to an email. So, the context of what you're trying to communicate really matters as to what medium you're picking to communicate that.
And I think
Zainab, very well said. Very well said.
To continue that, I agree with all of it. When you do pick your medium, you have to make sure that you are coming across the way you think. I actually have my coworker. There's only 3 of us in my business. So it's my mother, and I call her my work sister instead of work wife because it's like mother-daughter and whatnot. Her emails are not soft, right? Her emails are a straight sentence, point to the point, and that's it. But if she was asking you that question in person, it'd be all smiles and whatnot. So I'm constantly saying, that was so mean in your email. And I put smiley faces all over it. So like after we had the conversation, she sent me an email that had like 15 smiley faces in it. And but I think about that all the time, is in addition to everything you said, is how are you coming across? If email is fine for this choice of communication, are you coming across the way that you intend to come across?
Right.
And
right.
also, as leaders, as leaders, we have to clearly communicate to our teams, what's the best preferred way of communication, right? Instead of leaving them wondering what would be the preferred way, I think I always tell my people, if you ping me, I can respond quickly because I'm always lagging behind the emails, right? So it's important to communicate that. And Zainab, you said one thing which I really liked, about the empathy. I actually met one of the leaders. She's a great leader. She's a Buddhist nun. And I was asking her, sometimes we have people who don't listen to you or don't even perform well, and I have a hard time letting them go, right? What, as a leader, should I do? She said, very simply, she said, leaders have 2 wings. They have to have 2 wings. One is knowledge. The other one is empathy. Knowledge is going to help you to make the right decision. Empathy is the one that is actually going to put you in the right perspective to be able to understand the other person and be empathetic, not be, very business oriented kind of thinking, right? So it really helped me. It was many, probably even 2 decades ago, I heard from her, and it stuck with me. And it's important, right? You have to understand where the other person is coming from.
It's crazy.
Zainab, you're going to say something.
Yes, I would even say letting someone go who is not, right for the job is even empathy, because then they can go and find what, where they truly belong.
Yeah.
It hurts, but it is.
So Zainab, I might have you come the next time I have to let somebody go who's not right for the job, so that you can remind them that this is the empathetic side of me.
Yeah. You know what? I will say I lost a job once, and it was when I was completely burnt out, and it was the biggest gift that I could have been given. But my boss did it so empathetically that I didn't know what he was saying. And I said,
it's almost like tough love in the workplace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
here, tough love to our kids.
Yeah, so I know we've been talking about the multi-generational communication. I also think it's important that we address cultural communication. And I think that as we look at cultural differences, it's equally important to understand how to communicate from one generation to another, as it is to understand any particular cultural nuances that may impact the way people dress, the way they talk, their hours of work, their style of work. And that's something that has to be intentional, and that we need to be cognizant of taking the time to learn. So I just wanted to throw
you
that
brought
out.
Up something that is, I was going to actually bring that up, and glad that we kind of, gone into that. I came from a different country, right? When I moved to this country, I faced tremendous amount of challenges, especially one with communication and my accent. It's probably improved over the years, but at that time I had a very heavy Indian accent. And I used to work in a project, and the project manager is a Norwegian. And whenever I said something, he would say, "What? Huh?" The expression, and I used to really go back into my shell. It was very hard for me to communicate because I never felt there is this, openness for me to communicate. There is no space for me to communicate. So it took me years to really understand. And Scott, what you said about listening, that really helped me. I used to be the listener most times. I would open my mouth only if I'm adding value to the conversation. And I'm not suggesting that should be the only way, but that really helped me to be more confident, as when I said, people started to receive my input in a positive way, and it's really helped me to develop my confidence to be able to communicate. So communication, the confidence comes with listening. I really want to put that out. And I'm happy to listen to your experiences. I'm sure we all come from different cultures. So what has been your experience at workplace dealing with multicultures?
Well, I'll jump in. At my agency, one of the things that we specialize in is culturally competent communication and making sure that folks are able to connect with diverse audiences. And it's interesting that you talk about an accent, right? Because whether it's an Indian accent, whether it's a Spanish accent or a German, whatever the accent is, if people don't understand what you're saying, you won't be able to communicate. And so I do think that, and that's true regardless of the language. So if you're speaking in English, right, people need to try to understand your English. If you're speaking in Spanish or Portuguese or what, whatever the particular language is, that we have to stop to better understand. And I also think that if people are not understanding you and the way within which they say, what? Like, what did you say? That's like, I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Can you please repeat that? Can you say it again? I think it's important that when folks are asked that question, that they don't get offended, that they don't get frustrated, that they recognize it as somebody trying to understand as opposed to being totally dismissed. Because if people didn't care about what you had to say, they wouldn't even bother to ask you to repeat it. So there's that give and take, that push-pull that also needs to be taken into consideration.
That question of what is also a cultural thing. I found out later on, I spoke to someone else in the team. I said, I get offended every time he makes that face and says what. And they said that's he communicates. We all understood. We've been working with him for a long time. So I took the courage to go back and tell him that, if you don't understand, please let me know. I'm happy to repeat what I said. And we actually ended up being a good team all together. But initially, I didn't understand that was his style.
Yeah, I don't like that either. So when I say to people, don't say what. Say, excuse me. Say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand, but what? And don't say hey, because hey is for horses.
Right.
So.
Chaya, you mentioned something, Chaya, which is definitely a part of communication in which the person you're talking about probably didn't demonstrate correctly, is that body language.
Yeah.
Body language. You don't even have to say a word sometimes, and someone might feel intimidated. Somebody might feel offended. So I get back to this pause button. We got to understand, hey, do I have my arms crossed? There's all different forms of body language. Am I open to receiving the message? Do I have a frown on my face? Sometimes we're just tired, but yet we have a frown on our face and everything. And someone's going to interpret that they're upset with me, they're not interested and so forth. So it's almost like, and sometimes you need to do this in front of the mirror, like before you go anywhere. Just like work on, hey, your smile and everything. Or is that like rolling your eyes? I mean, what does that say? So body language is huge. And I'm realizing that even like as listeners, I mean, you could have someone who's listening, arms crossed, legs crossed, and just like looking at you with a stern look. They haven't said a word, yet their body language as a listener is somewhat offensive. So I think that's something we need to work on as well. And so this is interesting because you might be able, no, you really can't get away with it on a virtual presentation like this because you can't see someone's whole body and so forth. But there could be different ways in terms of our facial expressions. If we're doing something with our hands, if we're like seeming distracted by something, but more so in person. When we're in person, which again, I want to encourage everyone, love virtual sessions, love getting on the phone, love doing all this. And sometimes from a cost perspective, it's great. But anytime I could get on a plane and be face to face with someone and just really get a sense and really getting a sense of who you are, because the more you get to know yourself, the more that you will understand other people. I can't emphasize that enough.
You know,
And
it's
Scott,
Excellent point. Excellent point.
the body language, I haven't stopped thinking about it since the Zoom started. Like, you'll notice I'm incapable of sitting still. So I'm watching all of you and I'm like, well, they're just sitting in the center and their faces are closer and they're not moving. And I'm turning on and off my space heater behind me. I'm taking a drink. I've got a fidget in my hand right now that I'm playing with. And I'm so aware of all of that as I'm sitting here, and that's the only way I can be an active listener.
Well,
but that
that's
works
your
for
style.
you, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
Exactly.
works for you. Yeah.
That works for you.
Yeah.
And Scott, what I would say from a virtual perspective is turn your camera on. So
Always.
when you're communicating, right, I say, would you go to a meeting and sit in the hallway? No, you would go into the room. And so when it comes to communicating virtually, it is equally important that your camera is on and that you are engaged. And you're right, virtual communication, it's not new. We used to call it conference calling. So now, it's video conference calling. It's the same thing. And it's all about making sure that you are understood and that you are understanding.
And can I say
Someone's
something?
multitasking.
Yeah.
Who's like if I did this,
Right.
Yeah.
and I'm there. Wait a minute. Did I just get off the whole call? I don't. I want to come back. But there's no way. I might not even be listening. Somebody may say, this is a recording so you can listen to it later. No. You want to be engaged. You want to create that time so there are absolutely no distractions. So you're giving people the time.
Any meeting I lead, I start with, if I'm leading a meeting or it's appropriate for me to speak up, I say, please leave your camera on. If you want to eat, eat. If it's lunchtime, if you want to snack, I don't really care. And I follow it up with, because if my camera is off, I'm not listening.
Right.
I'm going
to do something. Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's
because especially for me, I'm like you all, right? I like people to get onto the camera. I'm never comfortable when I'm on the camera, the other person is off the camera, because I don't know what they're doing. And especially when you have a challenge with communication, people that have tough time communicating, I really recommend you turn your camera on, because the body language, as earlier it was said, right, it's going to communicate action. The expression is going to give the right meaning of what you're trying to say. If you turn the camera off and if you can't communicate well, it's a no. It's really going to be a disaster. So it's important that people can see your face. You're smiling and you're saying something. And Zainab, I also want to hear your perspective about the Zoom calls, turning cameras on and speaking. What do you think?
Yes. Well, when it comes to communication, especially through Zoom, I would say we are so used to listening passively. And this is where a lot of communication problems comes in, because, when listening becomes a passive thing, it's going to be hard for you to understand someone who has an accent. Because, if you're listening to someone who speaks the same language or speaks in the same tune as you, you don't have to, you don't need any motor skills in order to understand that. But if you're listening passively to someone who has a different accent, it would just go through your ears and you will just hear the sound and not really recognize what they're saying. But in today's society, we are used to listening passively, and we need to go back to our communications 101 classes that talks about active listening. If you don't understand what someone is saying, ask them within the moment or within their breaks of speaking, is this what you're saying? You want to summarize back to them what they just said to make sure that you are receiving the right information. And that also lets it also gives the speaker confidence to know that they're communicating and that you are receiving what they're communicating. And even as the speaker, one of the things that's very important, I know we talk a lot about what our image looks like, but what is your vocal image? What is like your vocal sound? What does that sound like when you're speaking, especially over like a Zoom call? You want to make sure you're projecting your voice in order for everyone to hear you or in order for the sound to come out properly. So those are some of the few tricks. But when it specifically comes to the camera on and off debate, now I know this is one of the things, especially for Gen Zs, we prefer the cameras off. And I would say, I don't want to be canceled today.
I'm waiting to hear what you got to say there. Go
Joanne,
ahead.
get ready. Joanne, the dumper, Joanne.
I totally agree with the camera being on. It creates an environment of engagement. You're able to engage with the speakers. You're able to engage with each other. You are actively engaging with each other with that camera on. When my camera is off, I am grabbing snacks. I am doing something else. So I totally agree with the camera being on.
Joanne actually went food shopping right now. Joanne's not even here anymore. She's coming back at 1:30. But no,
there you go.
there she is.
That is so funny.
Here.
I just turned off my second screen so
There
that I
you go.
didn't have any light coming at my eyes. That I'm like, like.
I would say if it's a large presentation that does not necessarily concern me, but I just need to hear the information, there's no need for me to turn my camera on. And that's one of the things that context really matters. Now, is this a meeting where I need to be fully informed or just be informed from afar?
Well,
There's a whole thing around meetings. And so I follow the model of what is it going to cost to have all these people meet? And so I didn't make this up. I learned this. I forget. I saw it on the news sometime last year. But you look at the hourly rate of the people that are in the meeting. If the outcome of that meeting is not at least equivalent to the cost to have all those people in the meeting, you don't need to meet. Because I don't need to meet you all the time. And if I'm going to have a meeting and you're going to turn your camera off, then you don't need to be there.
Yeah, and Cheryl, this can bring a completely different conversation, right? About, the productive meetings, and all that conversation can take a lot of time. And I'm really enjoying this communication conversation because it's fun. At the same time, I know, Joanne, we have a question, so we'll get to that in a minute. Is that what you're going to say, Joanne?
Yes, I was going to say.
Thank you. So I just want to bring up one thing, which is very important from SheTek perspective, right? So this is the reason why I started SheTek, because me being an immigrant, struggling with communication, being a woman, sitting in a conference with men, and really trying my best to interject and have my views expressed. That's the scenario, right? So later on, I realized I have to actually make people understand that I have something to say. So one trick I applied, I would raise my hand, sit like that until somebody notices and gives me an opportunity, gives me the space to speak. And the second time when I had this issue, I actually went to my boss and I said, I'm not attending the meeting. And he said, why? I said, I never get time to say anything. Anyway, I'm not adding any value. Maybe I can get the input from you after the meeting. And he felt really bad. You know what he did? I'm going to create that space for you. So we went back to the meeting and he said, Chaya has something to say. Can we listen to her? I was put in spot. I was so nervous. I was like, I wasn't expecting him to say that. But you know what? I took the courage to say what I wanted to say. And everybody paid attention. Sometimes the authority as leaders, we can give opportunity to others. I really want to put that out there and hear from you, your experience, your perspectives as well. And Scott, you're welcome to say your
No, but
perspective.
Chaya, I probably should have started off this event by apologizing for all men out there who can't get out of their own way. So I am so sorry you had to have that experience. And because you had that
Made me
experience, I
strong.
know there's something to be learned from it. But I do want to apologize, myself included, for any time we have ever had that intimidation, whatever it is. Again, we are learning, and we have a lot to learn.
I just saw a thing that went around on Facebook, so it might not be true, but it sounded fabulous, and it happened on the set of MASH. Does everybody know MASH? Zainab, are you too young, or do you know it?
I was going to say.
It's not potatoes.
Yes, not potatoes. So this was a show that we watched every week. It's my father's favorite show. I was in 6th grade when it was the last episode. But I'm going to get their names wrong, their real names wrong. Kellerman, Sally or Pam Kellerman, she had a suggestion during a script reading, and no one commented on it. And one of the male actors, a few minutes later, 20 minutes later, made the exact same suggestion. And they said, "Oh, that's a really good idea." And he actually said, "But yet it's exactly what Sally said, and you had nothing to say about it then." I always look for Scott to give a compliment to men. There are plenty of men out there who appreciate women for who they are and value their opinions and whatnot. And there are ones that will speak up in a similar way that your boss did, Chaya, and how this actor did and whatnot, that it's, "Excuse me, you can't bypass her just because she's a woman. Let's go. We're all here. We're all sitting in the room." But I've never been one to be quiet, so
I agree with
that's
you.
very common. I mean, and we know that. And then I'm going to say, as a Black woman, it's even more challenging, right? And so we are less respected, we are less heard, we are just at the bottom. So it's really important that we communicate effectively, right? And so whether it's somebody giving you the space or whether it's you making the space, it's really important that we do speak up. And I know you asked Chaya, as leaders, what can we do? I think that it's important that we create environments that allow people to be heard. And that's very different than allowing people to speak. And so I sometimes create what I call a container. And so you create that container, and in that space, you define and decide what type of a container you're in. And so if you want to have a container of trust, you want to have a container of safety where people feel safe. If you want to have a container of energy and excitement, right? So you gain alignment with whomever it is you're getting ready to have that conversation with. And you establish that container, and then you're able to move together in the same direction.
Yeah, that actually brings to another topic about communication styles, right? So I'm not talking about whether you use technology or you in-person communication or phone call. I'm talking about specifically each individual receives information differently. They process information differently because of their background. So as a leader, right, we have to really learn to communicate differently with different people. Did you come across that experience?
Oh, absolutely. And so my team here now, they are all very, very different, not just personalities, but different communicators. And so now don't get me wrong, I lose my temper and I go, "What?" So I am, a New Yorker, right? I'm living in Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl. I'm a New Yorker. And I'm a human being. However, at the end of the day, it's important that we sit with our colleagues, with our team members, and allow them to be heard, not just to speak. So here's a tip. I used to, for my one-on-one sessions, and maybe I'll go back to this, I would give people the option of, we have 40 minutes, 45 minutes scheduled. So I can ask you questions and we can talk, back and forth in a conversation about how you're performing and what's going on. Or you can talk for 6 minutes straight about anything you want to, and you get to choose. So that's a very interesting approach, because 6 minutes is a long time to just talk. However, you get the option of engaging in a conversation or simply sharing. So
now, Cheryl, does the call end after 6 minutes?
yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Done.
My wheels are really turning now.
Sometimes I'm glad I'm such a small team.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know we are getting close to the questions now. Anyone else wants to add anything
I do
that
want
we
to
haven't
add on
touched
to
on?
I did want to add on to what Cheryl said. I really like the idea of giving people, creating space for people to be heard and, not just speak. And I think that also comes from our value system. Do you value that do you believe that everyone has a value to bring to the table? Because if you do believe that, you would make room for everyone to speak, right? And because when we talk about inclusion and diversity, we are talking about this because we want to hear the different ideas, no matter what industry you're in. Everybody comes with a different set of skills, a different way of thinking of something. Whether you can look at one person can look at one product and, think of using that product in one way, but someone else, because of their background, because of, how they were raised, they will look at that product and think of using that product in a complete different way. And so when we look at individuals like that and say, this person might look different from what I look like, but they would have something of value to add onto this conversation, to add onto, this company. So they need to be heard,
Absolutely.
We want to get away from group thinking. We want to get away from us thinking the same. We want to include people despite of race, age, background, culture, and all of that. So I believe that's wonderful, Cheryl.
Yeah, excellent.
And I'm always trying to get people to talk to each other. They sit in they will share the office, and their chairs and they don't talk to each other. Or it's like 10 inches away. Get up and ask. Don't ping them. They're right there. Get your butt up out of the chair and ask them a question.
Blame it on the technology, Cheryl.
Of course.
But one thing, that's very obvious during this conversation is don't be judgmental just because of somebody's communication skills, right? That's very, very important. And what you said, Zainab, is about adding value. And one thing that I learned throughout my career is, you don't have to just say because you have to say something. You got to, there is nothing wrong in being a good listener. As Scott said earlier, just listen, right? And if you have to say something, you can add onto it. Just then you open your mouth and say. It doesn't have to be, there are a lot of people who keep talking and talking and talking. Doesn't have to be, you also just say anything, right? So the respect comes with it. And that calls for self-belief. We have to believe in ourselves. That's the first thing. We have to have that self-confidence, right? Then only you will dare to say something. So that's something I worked on. I wanted to build that self-belief, which I lacked as a young woman. And it took me years to build up. I still build my self-confidence every day, but that's what is going to help. I know we have some questions coming in. I really want to encourage our listeners to please pop in your questions there in Q&A. And Joanne, if we are all okay, I would like to switch to the questions. Are we good?
We are. Okay. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. Now, some of these you kind of discussed in general, but here's a few questions that have come in. And one was dealing with the younger generation, a kind of a general question. Do you think it's the generation, or is it just a learning curve that any young person anywhere might have gone through?
I think it happens every decade. I don't think that it's millennials or Gen Z or baby boomers. I think it is more mature, more experienced versus less mature, less experienced. And as we go through time, the labels that we give that generation of people may change, but it's all the same. We're trying to understand each other. We're trying to relate our experiences and, as Zanab said, our way of growing up and what we've lived through and trying to figure out how does that fit in today. If I hear one more time, I walked 10 miles to go to school, right? And then I say to my child, do you know how hard it was when I was in undergrad? So who knows what she's going to tell, the next generation after her, but it's all some form of the same thing.
I will say someone just said, I was having this conversation with a friend recently, and my kids are 10 and 13, this generation, high school students, they experience a world very different from what we experienced in that they have answers instantaneously, right? We would go home and check the encyclopedia if you had an set of encyclopedias. And if not, you went to the library. Otherwise, you just never found out the answer to the question. You just didn't know. There wasn't a way to just kind of go, oh, here we go. I'm going to Google it and get the answer instantaneously.
And trust that what you discover is accurate.
Yes.
And as Scott says, maybe you need to give yourself a pause button, because what you find, depending upon how it causes you to react or respond, you might need to just sit down for a moment.
And I work with a lot of youngsters, especially through my nonprofit wing. I have so many kids that I work with. I learn a lot from them every day. They probably have quicker answers than I can find, as Hope you said. So you got to be curious to learn. I think we cannot leave that curiosity to learn. That's what is going to help us to learn. And the other thing that comes to my mind when it comes to communication and judging other people is respect. We need to have that respect. If you come with the respect, go to the person, talk to them with respectfully, and it will eliminate all these communication barriers we're talking about. Respect comes first.
One of the things I do is actually take most of my conversations, I say, down to a personal level. I'm not the most corporate, professional human being. I will tailor myself based on the person I'm talking to. But if I'm able to just be the human that I am, and I'm able to build something with someone else who's working but is also just a human, I can accomplish so much more. I'm terrible at hearing accents, and your accent is very good, by the way, because I've not misunderstood one thing that you've said. But if I'm in a conversation with someone and I don't understand them, I put it on me. I explain to them that it is a weakness that I have recognized in myself for almost 30 years now, is I have very difficult time understanding it. I will ask very nicely what you said and say, this is me. I just know that I need help understanding it, and then move on with the conversation so that no one thinks I'm criticizing, because they're smarter than I am and that they can speak 2 languages and I can't. Unless you include gibberish from camp, and I don't. That's it.
And Joanne, do we have
We do have another question, and this one's a little more direct. Is somebody wanted to know if the panelists could suggest a polite way to encourage coworkers to not ignore younger team members, especially women and people of color. So not, to give an actual suggestion as to what would your approach be? How would you help the younger people by talking to coworkers?
So I think that can be done in a number of ways. Scott, you should probably answer this as the speaker. But I start listening to that person more and calling out them. Oh, well, what do you think, so-and-so? Giving them the opportunity. So that's the first thing I'll do, is give that person who is potentially being ignored a little bit the opportunity to speak, for others to see there's a reason that they're there. If you have to have a direct conversation, well, that really makes me question the person who's ignoring them. But you just have to say, you know, we're all here for a reason. We're all members of a team, and we all have valuable input.
I would also suggest, and it doesn't have to be a retreat on some glorious island, but it could be. I want to suggest team building exercises, some that just focus on communication. And I think that you'll find, let's say you have a group of 10, is that you will find that each one of those members, each of the 10 people, will be bringing something to the table and something useful to the table. You're probably going to have that person who's going to lead, and just they're a natural leader. You're going to have someone who, you know, doesn't like leading at all, but is very good at following a good leader. And then you're going to have people in between. And I think that's so important to do from time to time. I also want to suggest, which is great, especially when it's anonymous. This is a simple exercise that I do with a lot of clients, and this is professionally and personally, you know, and you could just focus on communication. 3 things you like about my communication, 3 things that you like to see improved with my communication. And you can put this out there and everyone gets back to you anonymously. And you can go, and I find this interesting, is that sometimes you want to go on a witch hunt. Like, ooh, I know who said that. I know who said that. That's not the purpose of the exercise. The purpose of the exercise is that sometimes we even need that compliment that we get, because we don't see that in ourselves. We don't hear that in our voice. But it's those areas of improvement that you could say, wow, you know what, this person's just projecting onto me. Make sure you do the work, though, before you say that. Or, yeah, you know what, I kind of knew this was an issue with me, but I'm really not wanting to change. Or those that hit you right between the eyes, like, I had no idea. I did this a long time ago with 25 people, just the family, friends, people who knew me. 3 things they like most about me, 3 things they like least. Each one of the 25 people, no joke, had one of the same things in common that they like least about me. And are you ready?
Yeah.
You're too nice. I was like, what? I'm too nice? And all of a sudden I thought about it, and it was just like almost this primal voice that came out of me, like, I'm not too nice. And I was like, whoa, is that I had such a fear of rejection at that point in my life. I didn't want anyone to be upset with me. And so like a laundry list came in which I started to realize, wait a minute, there is a time to say no. Doesn't mean I don't care. It might mean I don't have the time to do it now. So what's interesting is that 6 months later, I did with the same 25 people, now with that feedback, and they had other things that they wanted me to improve upon, but not one of them said you're too nice in that. And it's because I was able to capture that feedback, process it, not take it personally, and just say, wait a minute, there's no other way I could have possibly gotten this feedback that is so raw and so real. I'm going to leverage it and work with it.
There are leaders who do the 360.
Yeah.
And every year they get that kind of feedback from every one of their employees. And hopefully it's anonymous. They are brave. That is brave.
It's hard to receive. And I also think it's important that your team members get feedback. You know, I call feedback the new F word, right? So you've got to get that feedback, because if you don't, people won't be able to grow. People won't be able to collaborate. People won't be able to, the business. So now I'm going to say from a business perspective, right? Because at the end of the day, right, I have a business so that we can, I want to make sure everybody has food and everybody has housing. Those are my, you know, core values. But my business is here to make money, right? Whether you have a for-profit or a not-for-profit, revenue is the ultimate objective. And if people aren't communicating, you'll never achieve it.
I think it's also becomes an onus on the older generation to really understand where the younger generation is coming from. It's not always, you know, we can't teach younger generation to change to our styles, right? We are all talking about how do we communicate collaboratively. I think it also becomes our responsibility, the older generation, because everybody's is actually tuned to behave the way they are. I mean, our parents who come from older generations, they have tuned our minds in a way that we should be behaving. And the younger generation, they are exposed to many different things, technology, and their way of thinking is different. There's so much opportunity, I feel, for us to learn, for older generation to learn from younger generation. So the only way we can collaborate with each other is to learn from each other and respect each other.
Lee put something very interesting in the chat, and I'm not sure if it's her or him because it's Lee, but I agree in that the older generation was taught by traditional parents. So, I had a very different upbringing. Well, my parents were a little lenient than I give to my kids. And it's an interesting pattern to look at. Because it will determine who you eventually become and how you learn to respect someone else. And if you demand that respect, or if you expect the respect, that's something that goes back and forth in me all the time.
And I would just say what I said earlier, or reiterated it. There are cultural implications and cultural nuances that come into play. And I don't know what you mean by traditional, right? And so your tradition might not be my tradition. My tradition might not be Scott's tradition. And what I think, one word that I've heard Chaya say over and over during this engagement is respect. And I think that at the end of the day, you have to not only respect others, but also respect yourself. And so that's not always easy sometimes. And that challenge, if we can all hold up to that challenge and respecting ourselves and others, will go a long way.
Cheryl, you just made me think of something too with regards to respect and communicating. And I found this to be very, very powerful in my communication with other people who, I have like sometimes, and again, I'm wearing my professional, but also personal hat, is when like I have something seriously wrong, like something's not going right. I will always lead with compliments. I will always lead with what it is that they're doing well, how they're valuable, whether it be to the family or valuable in the business and so forth, because then you get their attention and then you're building up. Whereas if I start immediately with criticizing, even constructive criticism, I might put someone on the defensive. So I'm going to build you up. I'm not going to like make anything up. I'm really going to say why you haven't been fired yet and build you up and how you're valuable. And then say, hey, you know what? This is where there's an opportunity. And even if you can do this, especially as a leader, of showing them in that area how it was a challenge for you as well, and maybe still is a challenge for you, then all of a sudden they don't feel alone. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, there are other people who might be working through this. So there's not that isolation feeling. So I love building people up and then getting around to, the constructive criticism, so to speak.
That's an important point you made, Scott, because it's very difficult to give constructive feedback. You got to do your homework. You have to be very careful in how you express. One thing I would say, again, I'm going back to this, my project, the orphanage, right? So we give these kids opportunities to work in our company. So one of these kids who graduated, he wanted to get into our company. So he interned with us. And I said, yeah, you got the job and you can work with us. And we offered him a salary. And he comes back to me and he says, this is not what I was expecting, right? At that moment, I could think like, he's getting a job, right? And he grew up in our orphanage and he got a job. It's a great opportunity for him. But one thing that struck me is if he deserves this, right? He should be really competing with others. And I listened to him. Instead of saying no, I said, okay, do one thing, go through the interview process. If you can, prove your experience and you're a mid-level, not entry-level, you prove your experience, we will honor that. And he said, yes, I'll go through the interview process. I don't want any special treatment. Went through the interview process and he passed through and he got into a mid-level position in our company. So I'm saying we in our traditions are taught not to raise a question. When elders tell you something, you just listen. Know why.
My kids learn that sometimes.
Know why. And when our kids, in our kids' generation, they need answers to everything. If you tell them to do something, they would say, why? So our approach has to change. Our, response to the questions has to change. I think that change is so important, whichever tradition we come from. It's important that we have to see that it is changing. And it's, when you give an explanation, they receive it in a different way rather than an order. You can't just tell them what to do.
But Chaya, I'm going to say there has to be a shared responsibility in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say I completely agree that an older generation needs to understand a younger generation. I'm also going to say that a younger generation needs to understand an older generation. I think that none of us can live in a bubble. And because you're able to have a Finstagram and an Instagram, and you're able to, snap, and you think it's disappeared until you see that screenshot of whatever you said or did show up someplace else, right? You still have to know how to communicate with other folks, and you have to figure out what works. And if it's not something that comes to you naturally, and if it's not something that you're comfortable with, practice.
Yes.
So you have to work at it. And I think it's a shared responsibility for everyone, men, women, old, young, Blacks, whites, East Asians, Indians, all of us, right? And I think that's just kind of my values. I think as a culture and as a society, we owe it to each other to figure out how to not only give feedback, but receive it. You can't be pissed off because people don't like you. Like, that's just not okay. Not everybody's going to be happy with you. And so, I went to a career fair. I told a young man I didn't have an opportunity that was a fit for him. He went and blasted us on Google. I was so pissed. But I took a breath, right? I spoke to the interns. Right. I paused because I wrote a response. I didn't hit send. I paused, I breathed, and then responded and said, we were just being honest, and we don't have an opportunity that's a fit for you. So I think that it's equally important that we give, we receive, we respect, and we connect.
Yeah, and I see a question on the constructive feedback. It's it's from, let me see, it's from Abhiram, right? He was mentioning about, we often emphasize delivery aspect, yet there is significant challenge when the recipient perceives the feedback negatively, despite the intention behind it. So in your experience, how can recipients better interpret and utilize the feedback that initially feels negative, transforming it into a constructive force for achieving their objectives?
Ooh.
Anybody has anything to say about it?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because
I know.
you could be 100% like with your intention, with your delivery, and like 99% of people might like embrace that and be encouraged by that. And this is what I need to do to improve. And you could have that one person who just, whatever it is going to hang on one word, is going to hang on something and be negative. I think obviously there needs to be accountability. I like the pause button. I like writing something, rewriting it, maybe having someone look it over before you send it to someone. But you know what? You can't get caught up. I mean, yeah, you can say the same thing to 10 people, and 10 people have 10 different interpretations. At some point, you got to let it go and understand that they're like struggling with this because it's an issue for them. And maybe it was an issue at their previous job. Maybe it's an issue at home, whatever it may be. Can't get totally caught up in that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
You do have to understand that you cannot control the person's reaction, but you can control the way that you deliver something. And so there's no guarantee that what you say, they're going to take the way that you intend it to take, you just have to believe that you have been respectful in it and have not been pointedly insulting.
And Hope, the other point is it should never be a surprise. As long as there has always been open communication, and it shouldn't be a surprise if there's something negative that someone has to say, because you should be talking about it or communicating about it. I don't know if you're texting or emailing or documenting, but whatever that process is, because I don't like surprises, quite frankly, myself. I want to know what's going on, and if something isn't working, we need to know about it so we're not surprised when it fails. Similarly, when something's going well, right? I shouldn't be like, oh, wow, that really, like we should know we're doing well, which means you compliment folks along the way. You look at the little things. And so no one should be surprised.
I agree, Cheryl, because a lot of times in the big corporations, I have seen when I was in my, entry-level, mid-level career, the bosses would come to you and give you a performance review, and they tell you when you say you challenge their feedback, the first thing that comes from them is, I know I love you, I love what you do, but my hands are tied. This is what I was told to say, right? It's easy way to get out of the conversation, not take accountability. So what's important for a manager is to constantly provide that feedback and build that kind of trust relationship, right? That can be trusted from both sides. And it makes it easier to have those conversations. I completely agree with you. It cannot be a surprise.
Right.
One thing, I had once when I gave my feedback to one of my my team member, he was very upset. He started screaming, yelling because the company was laying off people, and we were given the responsibility to deliver the news to them. And I felt really bad. I was empathizing the situation. At the same time, I was delivering the news. And he said that you were lucky. You're in a better position. It's easy for you to empathize, but you don't really understand where I'm coming from. The only thing I did after that was, maybe this is not the right time. Let's both of us have another conversation. And we met for lunch outside the premises, and offsite we met for lunch. We had a very good conversation at a personal level. And I did tell him that, there are certain decisions which are out of my hand, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that we are telling you you're not doing your job. You're doing very well. The company's direction has changed, and they're trying to look for different type of skill sets. This is a great opportunity for you to find something that fits your passion. You don't want to be unhappy on this job. So that's the kind of conversation we had. And he rated me as a great manager in the survey. I was like, oh, I'm so happy. So, Joanne, I know there is another question out there. Long question.
There was one more question, but you actually had answered it previously. And I hate, it's beyond my, out of my hands, but we're almost out of time. We've got 1 minute left.
There you go. So look at that, how the time flies. Yeah. Okay. So I think we'll have to call it to an end, right? So really appreciate all of your time. I know we can speak for hours and hours on this topic, which is actually, the number of registrations told us how important this topic is. We might have another round of this, but truly appreciate all your insights, your experience, and I've learned a lot through this conversation. Thank you very much. And thanks to our audience too, for your being so interactive, and there's so many questions, so many comments. We're very excited. And if at all we didn't answer your questions, we will try to follow up on those. Right, Joanne?
Yes. Happy International Women's Day.
Yay.
Happy International Women's Day. Yes.
Women's Day.
Yes. Let's celebrate. Yes.
That's right.
And I think we're all going home with the pause button.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Scott, for that. So over to Joanne.
Well, actually, to wrap it up, I just have one little quick thing for those folks that are still with us. I want to pop up a quick little poll that to find out how you got here. How did you get here? Did you see it on LinkedIn? Did you see it in email? Did a friend tell you you've got to sign up? So those that are still with us, if you could pop it in real quick before you head on your way. We have a lot of things happening in SheTek, but we're also out of time, so I don't know if I'll do the whole PowerPoint slide, but you will be getting notification of the recording of this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint that went along with it, telling you about some of the amazing things that are coming up in SheTek, which include a job readiness training program, some other trainings that will be coming up, as well as looking forward to our annual conference. Yes, our international annual conference. Actually, we could even say that, which will be coming up in October. So please do stay tuned. And a lot of people saw the email. Yay! Sorry. Can you guess who sends out the email? But no, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Joanne, and thanks to everyone, and to the team, Pampton team, for really promoting this and spreading the word. I do want to say, before we leave, I do want to say that it's so close to my heart about this job readiness training that Joanne mentioned about. We are bringing up online training programs for communication skills, presentation skills, networking skills, which we didn't even have a chance to touch upon, the networking, but we will have another session maybe on it. But stay tuned, and these training programs are going to help everyone. And these conversations are really icing on the cake. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.